They called it protocol. She called it what it was. The first time Northgate Memorial questioned my right to walk through its doors was the morning I was 4 hours away from owning it. I had presented my hospital ID, my state medical license, and my attending physician badge. The same 3 items, the same desk, 11 years, not once questioned. Richard Holt looked at all 3, looked at the name printed beneath my photograph, Dr. Amara Osei, cardiology, attending physician, and said, "Your credentials have been flagged, Dr. Osei, was it? Was it?" As if the name I had carried into this building for 11 years through 47 procedures, through 1,000 overnight readings, through a $41.7 million acquisition offer filed under a company name no one here had thought to look up might not in fact belong to me. I did not raise my voice. My white coat was freshly pressed. My hands were still. 2 desks away, a man in a Veterans Administration jacket was telling a pharmacy technician he had been picking up the same prescription for 13 years. Same doctor, same window. $37 on the counter, laid flat, the way a person places money when they have already had to justify their presence more than once today. Nobody moved to help him. Nobody said my name. Nobody in that building knew that my father had walked these same corridors for 31 years, gray uniform, service entrance, never once called by his name by anyone on the administrative floor. I looked at the clock. 7 hours. 19 minutes. 1 signature. Then I looked at Richard Holt and I said, in the voice my mother taught me on a Tuesday in November, the voice that is not warm, not cold, only precise, I would like the written text of Directive 7C, the date it was implemented, the name of the compliance officer who authorized it, and the exact criteria that triggered the flag on my credentials this morning. For the first time, something shifted behind his eyes. Not guilt, not recognition, just the slight recalibration of a man who had expected this conversation to be shorter. He did not know what was sitting in my folder. He did not know that by 5 in the afternoon, every floor he had ever walked, every desk he had ever stood behind, every directive he had ever invoked in this building would belong to me. The man with the clipboard thought he was running a verification. He was standing in my hospital. Drop a comment and let me know where you are listening from. Because before I tell you what was in that folder, I need to take you back to where this morning started. 9 months earlier, Dr. Amara Osei sat in an office that had no business being her office. It was room 208 of a building on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard, 20 minutes from Northgate Memorial in light traffic, 40 in the kind Atlanta was more honest about most mornings. The nameplate beside the door read Osei Medical Consulting Group, a name she had chosen partly because it sounded larger than it was, and partly because it contained a message she was not yet ready to say out loud. The carpet was the color of old mustard. The overhead light buzzed faintly on cold mornings. Her desk was a solid wood executive piece she had bought secondhand from a law firm that dissolved in 2019, $340 and 2 hours with a rental truck. It was the most expensive item in the room. Her monthly rent for the office was $1,150. Her car note was $487. The remaining balance on her medical school loans, which she had been paying down since residency, was $614 a month. The mortgage on her father's house, which she had quietly assumed 18 months ago without telling him, was $1,102. Her health insurance, because her attending contract at Northgate Memorial did not include coverage she could actually use, was $319. Total fixed monthly obligations, $3,672. Her consulting income that month, $4,100, on a good month. She was not struggling, but she was not comfortable either. She was doing the precise arithmetic of a woman who had decided that the margins of her current life were not going to prevent the thing she was building, the thing that existed so far. Only in a spreadsheet she kept in a folder labeled RESCH. That morning, a text had arrived from her younger sister Yolanda. "Hey, I know you were busy." The transmission on the Camry finally went. "Marcus says it is $2,200 to fix. I am not asking you to cover it, just wanted you to know in case I am late on the phone bill. Love you." Amara read it twice. Then she transferred $2,200 to Yolanda's account without replying because she was already late to a call. 3 hours later, she texted back, "Already handled. Do not worry about the bill." Have them check the brakes while they have it. Then she returned to her spreadsheet. What the spreadsheet contained was not consulting projections. It was a 3-year acquisition model for the Northgate Memorial Hospital network, all 4 campuses, including the original building on Decatur Street where her father had mopped floors, repaired leaking pipes, and carried equipment through service corridors for 31 years without a single person on the administrative floor knowing his name. The idea had begun not as ambition, but as grief. 7 years ago, her mother had been admitted to Northgate Memorial with a treatable cardiac arrhythmia. The treatment had been delayed by 11 hours, not because of equipment failure, not because of staff shortage, because her intake had been routed through 3 separate departments, each citing a different internal protocol, each deferring to the next. By the time Amara, then a second-year resident at a hospital across the city, had driven through evening traffic and reached the floor, her mother had been waiting in a hallway bed for most of the day. Her mother had survived. She had never fully recovered her prior cardiac function. Amara had not quit. She had not filed a formal complaint. She had spent the next 6 years studying every financial structure, every regulatory mechanism, and every equity instrument available under Georgia's private healthcare statutes. She had attended 3 continuing education programs in healthcare finance. She had built relationships with 2 private equity firms, not as a client, but as a consultant, trading her clinical expertise for access to deal structures she was learning from the inside. The capital she had assembled through personal savings, a 9-physician equity syndicate, and a community development financial institution loan was $4.3 million. The acquisition target was controlling interest in the Northgate Memorial Hospital network, majority held by a regional investment group that had been quietly seeking an exit since a failed campus expansion in 2021. The offer she had submitted 8 months ago through a holding company called Osei Medical Partners, LLC, was $41.7 million, structured as a leveraged buyout with retained management, a community reinvestment covenant, and a physician ownership requirement in year 3. Nobody at Northgate Memorial knew, not her colleagues, not her patients, not Richard Holt with his clipboard and his Directive 7C, not her father. Then, 6 weeks ago, the Federal Department of Health and Human Services had completed its regulatory review. Last Thursday, the State Medical Board of Georgia had scheduled its final approval vote. Yesterday evening, her attorney had called. The vote passed, she said. 7-2. The finalized ownership certificate will be ready for your signature tomorrow morning at 10. Once it is signed and filed with the state registry before 5 in the afternoon, the transfer is complete and legally binding. And if it does not file by 5, the review window resets. The current investment group has grounds to petition for a 45-day extension. They have been trying to find an exit from this deal for 2 months. A 45-day window gives them time to pursue the competing offer. What is the competing offer? A hospital management group out of Nashville. No community reinvestment clause, no physician ownership requirement. Significantly cleaner from the seller's perspective. There was a pause on the line. So it has to be today, Amara said. It has to be today, her attorney confirmed. She had arrived at Northgate Memorial at 9:35 that morning, presenting her credentials as she always had, as an attending cardiologist with a patient waiting on the 6th floor. She had planned to spend 2 hours on rounds, step out to sign the finalized paperwork at her attorney's office 3 miles away, return for afternoon notes, and reach the state medical board filing window before it closed. She had not planned for the man with the clipboard. 3 clocks were running now, whether she was ready or not. Clock 1, 5 in the afternoon. State medical board filing deadline. Miss it. And 45 days handed to a management company that had never once heard the name James Osei and would never need to. Clock 2, 7:30 in the evening. Congressional Subcommittee testimony on healthcare equity in underserved communities. 6 months of correspondence. 1 late-night phone call to a policy director she had met at a conference in Washington. 5 minutes of prepared remarks that had taken her 4 years to earn the right to give. Clock 3 was not a filing or a hearing. It was a reception on the 1st floor of this exact building, the lobby where she had once waited for her father at the end of his shifts as a child. Watching him come through the service door in his gray uniform smelling like floor cleaner and quiet pride. Tonight at 8 in the evening, Northgate Memorial was hosting James Osei's retirement ceremony. 31 years. A plaque. A room full of people who had walked past him for 3 decades without once wondering who kept the lights working. He did not know what his daughter had done. He only knew she had asked him to wait, not to retire until she could stand beside him when he did. The numbers were simple, and they were brutal. She had 4 hours and 13 minutes to walk through a door that should never have been closed to her in the first place. Standing still is a skill. Most people mistake patience for the absence of movement. They mistake composure for the suppression of feeling. They see the person who does not flinch and read it as coldness or fear, and they use that reading to push harder, to wait for the crack they believe must be there. My mother taught me the difference between stillness and absence. She did not teach it as a lesson. She taught it on a Tuesday in November of 1995 in the kitchen of our apartment on Sylvan Road in southwest Atlanta. While the radiator knocked against the baseboard and something on the stove kept the cold from settling all the way in, I was 9 years old. She was 37. Her name was Dorothy Osei. She was 5 feet 4 inches tall, close-cropped hair, practical shoes, and she had a way of entering a room that did not announce itself. She simply arrived, set down what she was carrying, and began doing the next necessary thing. She had just come off a 13-hour shift as a home health aide for a family in Buckhead, a 40-minute drive each way in a 1991 Honda Civic with a heater that worked on a schedule of its own. She had barely removed her coat when the phone rang. I remember the call because of how she answered it. She said yes, then I see, then all right, and then nothing for a long time, just listening. The way she listened, spine straight, one hand resting flat on the counter, face completely still, made me stop pretending to do homework and actually watch her. When she hung up, she stood at that counter for exactly 3 seconds. I counted because even at 9 years old I understood that 3 seconds was not a pause. It was a decision. Then she went to the hallway closet, not her bedroom, not the kitchen drawer. The hallway closet, second shelf from the top, behind the spare blankets. She pulled out a shoebox I had seen but never opened. Inside was a clear plastic sleeve zipped along the top. Inside the sleeve was a stack of papers, each one laminated or kept in its own protective pocket. Her certified nursing aide license, her current CPR certification, her home health aide registration, renewed every 2 years without missing a cycle, the active one dated January of that year. Her employer's letter of commendation, signed by the agency director. 3 handwritten letters from families she had served, on personal stationery in the specific language of people who had chosen their words carefully. She carried the sleeve to the kitchen table. She laid it open. She did not explain it to me. What had happened, I found out later from an aunt, never from my mother, was this. The family she worked for had called her supervisor that afternoon. They wanted to know whether her credentials were really current, whether her certification was actually valid, whether someone at the agency could verify that she was who she said she was. There had been no incident. No complaint about her work. The family had simply decided, on that particular Tuesday in November, that they needed to be sure. Her supervisor had called to inform her. My mother's response was to open the sleeve on the kitchen table, review each document. Once in silence, confirm that everything was where it was supposed to be, return the sleeve to the shoebox, return the shoebox to the closet, and then come back to the kitchen and make dinner. She did not call the family. She did not call her supervisor back. She did not raise her voice, though I watched her face close enough that I would have known if she had come anywhere near it. While she stirred the pot, she said one thing, not a speech, not a lesson, just a statement addressed to the steam rising off the stove. Baby, always keep your proof where you can reach it. I thought she was talking about the shoebox, about the sleeve, about the habit of keeping documents in order. It took me 20 years in medicine in operating rooms where my competence was assessed before my coat was fully on. In conferences where colleagues were called by their titles while I was asked if I was in the right building. In 100 small moments where the system paused at my name, in a way it did not pause at others to understand that she was not talking about paperwork. She was talking about the posture of a person who already knows the answer when the question is asked. She was talking about arriving prepared before anyone thinks to check. She was talking about standing still, not because you have no choice, but because you have already done everything that needed to be done, and the person in front of you does not yet know that. That lesson did not leave me. It became the architecture of everything I built after. The reason I kept records of every contract I ever signed. The reason I followed verbal agreements with written confirmations. The reason I had 12 years into my medical career, a filing system organized by date, institution, and document type, not out of unusual caution, but because my mother had shown me, on a November Tuesday in a Southwest Atlanta kitchen, what it looks like to be a woman who cannot afford to be caught without evidence of herself. Today, standing at the 6th-floor nursing station of Northgate Memorial Hospital, waiting for a man with a clipboard to return with documentation for a directive he had cited with the confidence of someone who had never expected to be asked for the written text. Today was the day her lesson would be tested to its furthest edge. Richard Holt was still on the phone. I had not moved. 9:51 in the morning. 49 minutes until my attorney's electronic signature window opened. He returned 3 minutes later holding a single printed page. I recognized the format immediately. It was a General Operations Bulletin, the kind distributed to department heads at the start of each quarter, covering everything from updated parking validation to visitor policy revisions. The kind of document containing, somewhere in its body, a sentence that could be lifted from its context and presented, in isolation, as the justification for almost anything. He had highlighted one paragraph in yellow. Providers operating under non-standard access classifications, including but not limited to consulting agreements, provisional appointments, and cross-institutional referral arrangements, may be subject to enhanced identity verification procedures at the discretion of the operations director in accordance with current compliance directives. I read it once. I set it on the counter between us. I am not a consulting provider, I said. I am not under a provisional appointment. I am not a cross-institutional referral. I am a salaried attending physician with an 11-year continuous employment record at this institution. None of those classifications apply to my position. The system flagged your access tier, he said. Which system, specifically? The credential management platform. What is the name of the platform? A pause, brief but real. MedVerify. The updated version rolled out last month. Was there a written notification to attending physicians about changes to the verification criteria? Another pause. Communications went through department heads. I did not receive one, not an accusation. A fact placed on the table beside his highlighted paragraph. 9:54 in the morning. 6 feet to my left, Patricia Webb had moved to the medication preparation cart. Her back was toward us. She was counting tablets with a concentration the task did not require. Mr. Holt, I said, I am going to need you to document, in writing, with your name, your title, and today's date, the specific grounds on which you are currently restricting my access to the patient floor. I am not restricting your access, he said, with the measured tone of a man who had rehearsed the distinction. I am asking you to complete the verification process before proceeding. Where does the verification process take place? Compliance office. 2nd floor. Which opens at 10. That is correct. So your position is that I should wait in this lobby for 6 minutes, during which time my patient in room 614, admitted this morning with an ejection fraction of 31%, remains without her attending cardiologist. On the basis of a system update I was not notified of and a paragraph that does not apply to my employment classification. He held the clipboard in both hands now. I am asking you to follow protocol, Dr. Osei. Is following a protocol the same as being right? Or is it simply a way of being wrong, with paperwork to show for it afterward? I set my bag on the counter. Slowly, deliberately, from the front pocket I removed 3 items and placed them side by side on the desk between us. My National Board of Cardiovascular Medicine certification, renewed 14 months ago, valid through the following year. My Georgia medical license. My Northgate Memorial Attending Physician Employment Verification Letter, printed on hospital letterhead, dated from my most recent contract renewal in March. 3 documents, precisely arranged, each one a sentence before I spoke. These are current, I said. These are valid. These belong to me. I looked at him steadily. Would you like to tell me which of these requires additional verification? Or would you like to tell me what this is actually about? The lobby did not go loud. It went the other kind of quiet, the kind that happens when a room full of people realizes they are watching something they will have to decide, later, whether they saw. Two nurses at the far end of the hallway had stopped moving. A man in a visitor badge near the elevator was looking at his phone but had not scrolled in 40 seconds. Patricia Webb had stopped counting. Holt did not answer the question. Instead, he turned to the desk computer and began typing. His expression did not change. His posture did not change. The only thing that moved was the monitor, which he angled slightly away from me. Slightly, but not enough. I am a cardiologist. I read information in fractions of a second. I read pressure gradients, waveform deviations, the millimeter differences that separate stable from critical. I read what is not being shown to me as carefully as what is. In the half second before he adjusted the screen, I saw my name in the system. Beside it, in a red-bordered text field I had never seen in 11 years at this institution, were two words: Flag Escalate. It had not been there yesterday. I had logged into the same system at 7:42 that morning to check my patient's overnight readings from home. My name had appeared exactly as it always had. No flag, no note, no red border. Someone had added it this morning. After I arrived, I did not react. My face did not change. I picked up my 3 documents, returning them to my bag, and straightened to my full height. Holt looked back at me. "The compliance office will be available in 5 minutes, I said. "I know." I walked to the row of chairs along the far wall. I sat down. I crossed my legs. I opened my phone. Not to call anyone, not yet. I opened my notes application and typed without looking up. 9:57 in the morning, Holt cited Directive 7C. Referenced MedVerify platform update. No attending notification confirmed. Produced operations bulletin paragraph. Non-applicable to permanent employment classification. Computer screen showed flag ESCALATE in red field. Not present at 7:42 login. Added after my arrival. No prior record in 11 years. My mother had taught me that too. Document everything. Not because you plan to use it, but because the person who wants to rewrite what happened is always counting on you not having written it down first. I sat in that chair and I waited. I watched Richard Holt make 2 more phone calls he positioned his back to conceal. I watched Patricia Webb push her medication cart around the far corner without once looking in my direction. And I thought about the folder still sitting at the bottom of my bag. My hand rested on top of the leather. Not yet. I had been watching him since 9:43 in the morning. I did not know his name yet. I knew his jacket, Navy, Veterans Administration insignia on the left chest, laundered enough times to soften the embroidery at the edges. I knew his hands, large-knuckled, steady, the hands of a man who had spent decades doing things himself and had never expected that to require explanation. I knew the 2 folded $20 bills he had placed on the pharmacy counter with the careful, unhurried precision of a person who was not asking for charity, only for what had already been prescribed, already paid for, already needed. The pharmacy technician Marcus, according to the tag on his chest, was in his mid-20s, professional, and visibly uncomfortable in the way people become when they are being asked to enforce something they did not write and do not fully believe in. "I understand, sir," Marcus said. "But the system is showing an incomplete supplemental coverage verification. Our protocol requires a secondary confirmation before. I have been filling this prescription for 13 years, the man said. His voice was quiet, not raised. The quietness of someone who has had to explain himself this way before, enough times that volume no longer seems worth the effort. Same pharmacy, same medication, same doctor. Dr. Hargrove. He has been my cardiologist since 2011. I understand. I have $37 left this week. He had adjusted his count since I first noticed him. He must have recalculated while waiting. My granddaughter drove me here. She is waiting in the car." Marcus looked at his screen, then at the prescription bottle, then at the insurance card, then back at the screen with the expression of someone searching for a mechanism that the system had not provided and no one senior was present to authorize. He looked up. Past me. To the right. Toward the nursing station where Richard Holt was still standing, phone in hand. Holt heard. He did not turn around. 10:03 in the morning. The compliance office had been open for 3 minutes. The state medical board filing deadline was 6 hours and 57 minutes away. I looked at my phone. 3 notifications had arrived in the last 8 minutes, which I had not yet opened. Then I looked at the man at the pharmacy window. And I did what every person in a lobby like this one does, in a moment like this one, quietly, without being asked, and without anyone else knowing it is happening. I did the math. If I walked to that pharmacy window right now, I would spend time I did not have. Every minute spent in this building was a minute borrowed against a 5 in the afternoon deadline that had no flexibility. The investment group's lawyers were almost certainly already standing by. They needed only the window. If I delayed the compliance visit to intervene at the pharmacy, the flag on my credentials would remain active. Holt would have additional justification for the escalation he was clearly preparing. My patient in room 614 had now been without her attending cardiologist for nearly 2.5 hours. If I missed the 5 in the afternoon filing, 45 days. A management company from Nashville with no community reinvestment clause, no physician ownership requirement, and no reason to know or care that a man named James Osei had spent 31 years keeping this building standing from the inside. And the testimony at 7:30 in the evening, 6 months of letters. 1 late-night phone call. 5 minutes of prepared remarks about precisely this. About what happens to Black patients inside systems that were never designed to see them clearly. The arithmetic was not complicated. Acting now cost me more than I could quantify in real time. When the cost of doing the right thing can be measured precisely, in minutes, in filing deadlines, in 45-day windows, is silence still a choice? Or is it just arithmetic wearing a more comfortable name? I looked at my phone again. I looked at the man at the pharmacy window. He had picked up the prescription bottle and was turning it slowly in his hands, not reading the label he already knew what it said, but holding it the way you hold something you are being told politely and procedurally, that you may not have. With the specific, exhausted dignity of a man who has been patient about this particular kind of thing too many times to be surprised by it, but not so many times that it no longer costs him anything. Then he did something small. He set the bottle back on the counter. Carefully, the way you set down something you were never entirely sure was yours to keep. And then he reached into the inside pocket of his Veterans Administration jacket and took out a photograph, which he placed beside the bottle and the insurance card, on the counter, without comment. It was a school photograph. A girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, in a purple dress, hair in 2 neat puffs, grinning at the camera with the specific joy of someone who had been told a joke right before the shutter clicked. He did not show it to Marcus. He did not explain it. He simply placed it there, as if to remind himself, or the system, or anyone watching, of the exact and specific weight of what was being decided at that window. I closed my notes application. I stood up. Patricia Webb saw me rise from the chair before I had taken a single step. She saw where I was going. She understood what it meant. 14 years on this floor. She knew every policy, every protocol, every unwritten rule, and she knew precisely what Richard Holt had been doing since 9/41 and precisely what I was walking toward. She opened her mouth. Then she looked at her medication cart, at the trays still needing distribution before morning rounds, at the hallway clock, at the floor. She closed it again. Her silence was not nothing. It was a decision made in real time, with full awareness of what it cost, not her, but someone else. She would carry it longer than she expected to. I did not know that yet. I would learn it later. 10:06 in the morning. I reached the pharmacy window and stood beside the man in the Veterans Administration jacket. "Excuse me," I said to Marcus, not loudly. "I am Dr. Amara Osei, attending cardiologist." "What is the specific coverage flag showing on Mr.?" I looked at the man beside me. "Washington," he said. "Earl Washington. What is the flag on Mr. Washington's account?" Marcus looked past my shoulder. I did not need to turn around to know who he was looking at. "The supplemental verification status is it a billing flag or a coverage eligibility flag?" Coverage eligibility. "The secondary insurance code is, has the primary coverage been confirmed?" "Yes, but the secondary." "Process the primary. The secondary discrepancy can be resolved through a separate claim. Mr. Washington has a 13-year prescription history at this pharmacy. The medication is not in question. The billing pathway is." Marcus looked at me, then at his screen, then back at me. "I can do that," he said carefully, "if a supervising physician authorizes the overriding. I am authorizing it." I heard footsteps before Holt spoke. "Dr. Osei." His voice had changed register. Still controlled, still professional, but calibrated louder now, positioned deliberately for an audience. 10:07 in the morning. "You are not currently cleared to perform clinical functions on this floor," he said. "That includes authorizing pharmacy overrides." I turned to face him. "I am an attending physician at this institution," I said. "My clinical privileges have not been suspended. They have been administratively delayed, pending a verification process for which I have not been provided written criteria. Until verification is complete. Show me the written policy that suspends attending physician clinical authorization rights during an administrative credential hold, the specific document, the specific clause number, the date of implementation." The lobby did not get loud. It became the other kind of quiet, the kind where a room full of people realizes it is watching something that will require each of them, before the day is over, to decide what they saw. 2 nurses at the far end of the hallway had stopped moving. A man in a visitor badge near the elevator had raised his phone. He was not obviously recording, but he was not putting it away either. Holt stepped to the nursing station desk. He picked up the desk receiver. He spoke into it for 11 seconds, his back half turned. When he replaced the receiver, he looked at me. "I have contacted building security," he said, "as a precautionary measure." 10:09 in the morning. My phone vibrated 3 times in rapid succession. I looked at the screen. The first message was from my attorney, Margaret Osei Akiampong. "Amara, documents are ready. Latest I can hold your slot is 11 in the morning. I need you here no later than 10:45. After that, I have a deposition that cannot move, and the notary leaves at noon. If you miss this window, the filing cannot happen today. Please confirm you are on your way." The second message was from Dr. Kevin Park, who had agreed to introduce me at the Congressional Subcommittee hearing. Quick check-in. The committee's office needs final attendance confirmation by noon today. After that, they go to the alternate witness, and the slot is gone. 6 months is a long time to wait for another invitation. Let me know. The third message was from my father. "Baby, just wanted you to know I pressed my uniform this morning. First time in 31 years I have pressed it for something other than work. Room 114, 8 o'clock. See you tonight. Love, Dad." 3 messages. Read in 5 seconds. I did not reply to any of them. 10:11 in the morning. 2 security officers came through the stairwell door. They positioned themselves at the edges of the lobby with the practice placement of people who had been told to be visible but to make no contact unless instructed. Earl Washington had not moved from the pharmacy window. He was holding the photograph again, watching. Holt moved to the center of the lobby. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Dr. Osei, I understand the situation is frustrating. Our protocols exist to protect patients, staff, and this institution. What I need you to do right now is move to the ground floor lobby while we complete the verification process. Someone from the compliance team will meet you there within the hour. Move to the ground floor lobby, where there were no patient records, no pharmacy windows, no one watching from hallways, where whatever happened next would happen without witnesses." The man near the elevator had not lowered his phone. Patricia Webb had reappeared at the edge of the far hallway, standing completely still. 10:12 in the morning. 108 minutes until my attorney's filing window closed. 7 hours and 48 minutes until the state medical board deadline. I thought about my father pressing his uniform that morning. 31 years. A gray custodial uniform pressed for the first time for something other than a shift. A retirement ceremony on the ground floor of this exact building, in a room he had cleaned 1,000 times, where tonight they would give him a plaque and a handshake and send him home. And he would have no idea that his daughter had spent 3 years quietly, legally, contractually purchasing the building out from under the people who had never once learned his name. When you have made a promise to someone who has never asked you for a single thing, what does honoring it actually require? And what does breaking it take from both of you, in the place where promises live? Holt's phone rang. He answered it, turning slightly away, his voice dropping below the ambient noise of the lobby. I heard 4 words clearly before he cupped his hand over the receiver. "She is still down here." I sat back down in the chair against the wall. I reached into my bag, past the folder. I took out my laptop. I opened it. I opened a new document. I began to type, not notes this time, not a log, but a formal written statement, my name, my title, my 11-year employment record. The events of this morning in precise chronological sequence. Directive. 7C cited at 9:41 in the morning. Written criteria requested and not provided. Med-Verify platform referenced with no attending notification confirmed. Operations bulletin paragraph presented and refuted on classification grounds. Flag ESCALATE observed on credential screen at 9:47 in the morning. Pharmacy authorization denied at 10:07 in the morning. Security summoned at 10:09 in the morning. Instruction to vacate floor issued at 10:11 in the morning. Every word precise. Every action attributed by name. Every timestamp recorded. I did not hurry. I did not look up. The two security officers watched me type. Richard Holt watched me type. Patricia Webb from the far end of the hallway watched me type. Earl Washington watched me type. I had not opened the folder. Not yet. But I had everything I needed. And in 38 minutes in the compliance office on the second floor of this building, with every person now standing in this lobby as a witness to what had been done on this morning, Richard Holt was going to find out exactly what was inside it. 10:43 in the morning, 17 minutes until my attorney's electronic signature window opened. 6 hours and 17 minutes until the state medical board deadline. My phone buzzed once against the compliance office table. I looked at the screen. One new email. The sender was the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. The subject line was 9 words. R.E. Osei Medical Partners, LLC. Final approval confirmation. I opened it. I read the first 2 paragraphs. Then I looked up at Diane Marsh, the compliance officer who had been sitting across from me for the past 28 minutes reviewing documents, taking notes, and asking the careful procedural questions of someone who had realized, approximately 11 minutes into our conversation, that she was no longer handling a routine credential dispute. Ms. Marsh, I said, I need to go back upstairs. I would like you to come with me. She looked at the folder on the table between us. Is there something I should know before we go up? She asked. Yes, I said, several things. I opened the folder. There is a particular quality to silence when power shifts. It does not announce itself. It does not arrive with drama or sound. It arrives the way a change in barometric pressure arrives, felt before it is understood, registered in the body before it is processed by the mind. That was the silence in the 6th floor lobby at 10:51 in the morning when I stepped off the elevator with Diane Marsh behind me. Richard Holt was at the nursing station. He straightened when he saw me. Dr. Osei. The professional calibration was back in his voice. He had used the last 40 minutes to prepare for a different version of this moment. I have been in contact with the Chief Medical Officer's office. If you would like to schedule a formal review. I walked past him to the nursing station counter. I set my bag down. I reached inside. I took out the folder. I placed it on the counter and opened it. I did not announce what it contained. I did not explain it first. I removed the first document and placed it face up on the desk between us, the way my mother had once placed a clear plastic sleeve on a kitchen table on a Tuesday in November, without drama, without preamble, with the complete confidence of someone who has already done the work. It was a single page on State Medical Board of Georgia letterhead. At the top, a certification number, a date, a series of reference codes corresponding to the acquisition filing. At the bottom, under the section marked Controlling Interest Designation, a line that had not existed in any public record until 10:43 that morning. Osei Medical Partners, LLC, majority shareholder, 51.3% controlling interest. Northgate Memorial Hospital Network, effective date and time of federal approval. I watched his eyes move across the page. I watched the moment they reached the percentage. I watched his face do what faces do when they encounter information that rewrites the room they are standing in, not quickly, not cleanly, but in the specific, incremental way of a person whose certainty is dismantling itself one sentence at a time. I gave him 4 seconds. What that means, Mr. Stir. Holt. I said in the same precise unraised register I had used since 9:41 in the morning, is that as of 10:43 this morning, when the Federal Department of Health and Human Services issued its final approval. The individual you spent this morning asking to step away from the patient floor became the majority owner of the institution you work for. He opened his mouth. Nothing came. I placed the second document on top of the first. It was an internal data report, produced by the hospital's own operations analytics system and pulled during the acquisition due diligence process 3 months ago. The kind of report that exists in every large institution and is almost never shown to the people it most directly concerns. In the 14 months since your appointment as Director of Operations, I said, the flag ESCALATE notation was applied to provider credentials 23 times under your authorization. Of those 23 flags, 82.6% were applied to providers who were Black, Latino, or Asian. Of those 19, 11 resulted in documented delays to patient care of more than 1 hour. The 3 most recent flags, including the one added to my record this morning before 7:42, before I had entered this building, each occurred while the flagged provider was actively engaged with a Black or elderly patient at the point of service. I let the numbers remain on the counter between us. Numbers do not require elaboration. They only require a surface to rest on and a room that is quiet enough to hear them. This morning is not an isolated event, Mr. Holt. It is a pattern with a timestamp, a percentage, and 11 patients whose care was delayed by something that is not a policy. Today is simply the day that someone was in this room with both the data and the legal authority to act on it. He found his voice. You set this up? The professional tone was gone. What was underneath it was flatter and more honest. You came in here specifically to do this. You planned all of. I came in here, I said, to see my patient in room 614. I presented my credentials at 9:41 in the morning, as I have done at this desk for 11 years. I requested access to the patient floor. I asked for written documentation of the policy cited to restrict that access. I recorded every word I was told and everything I observed. I looked at him without anger, without satisfaction, with the clarity of someone who has already written the statement and does not need the conversation to go any particular way. The rest of this morning was your choice, Mr. Holt, every minute of it. He said nothing. I turned to Patricia Webb. She was standing at the edge of the nursing station, tablet in both hands, her face arranged in the careful blankness of someone managing a specific internal calculation. She had been managing it since 9:43 in the morning. She already knew the answer. She was waiting to see if saying it out loud would be required. Ms. Webb, I said, when you are ready, Mr. Washington is still at the pharmacy window. Dr. Hargrove's standing prescription is on file. Please ensure the authorization is processed. 1 sentence, 1 task, no judgment in my voice, no forgiveness either. Just work that needed to be done, assigned to the person standing closest to it. She nodded once. Her hands, I noticed, were not entirely still. I picked up my phone. I opened the hospital's administrative platform, the owner-level access provisioned to my credentials at 10:43 in the morning, simultaneous with the federal approval. I navigated to the pharmacy authorization module. I located Earl Washington's record. I processed the override myself. 47 seconds. I looked across the lobby. Marcus had already received the system notification. He was reaching for the prescription bottle. Earl Washington took it with both hands. He held it for a moment. Not the moment of someone overcome, but the moment of someone returning to themselves after being required for too long to be patient about something that was always theirs. Then he looked across the lobby and found my eyes. He gave one slow nod. Not theatrical, not tearful, not the performed gratitude of someone who has been made to feel they should be grateful for what was never supposed to be withheld. Just one nod. The acknowledgement of one person by another, in a room where, for a brief and specific morning, the system had gotten in the way of both of them. I turned back to Richard Holt for the last time. Fairness is not only a moral principle, Mr. Holt, I said. In modern healthcare, it is a measurable performance indicator. Institutions that apply their protocols consistently to every provider, every patient, every morning, regardless of the name on the badge or the face behind it, demonstrably outperform those that rely on assumption and selective discretion. I have the research. I have this institution's own data. I closed the folder. I will be presenting both to the board within the week. I looked at the clock above the elevator bank, 10:54 in the morning. 6 hours and 6 minutes until the state medical board filing deadline. I closed my laptop. I placed it in my bag. I straightened my coat. Diane Marsh was already writing. The lobby did not erupt. It recalibrated. That is the word for what happens when something shifts structurally, not emotionally, when the foundation of a room moves an inch and everyone feels the change before anyone has language for it. The two security officers looked at each other, then at Holt, then at the floor. Neither moved. There was nothing left for them to be present for. The nurses at the far end of the hallway began, one by one, to return to what they had been doing before 9:41, but differently. With the particular, deliberate focus of people who have decided that being visibly occupied is the most dignified option currently available. The man near the elevator, the one who had raised his phone 43 minutes ago and had not clearly lowered it since, was looking at his screen, not at the room. He was deciding something. Not whether he had recorded anything useful, whether what he had recorded was something the world needed to be shown. Richard Holt sat down, not dramatically, not with collapse. He simply reached behind him for the desk chair, located it, and sat down in it the way a person sits when their legs have reached a conclusion their mind has not yet fully accepted. He looked at his computer screen. He looked at the documents on the counter. He looked at his screen again. The understanding was arriving in him the way winter arrives in Atlanta, not all at once, not with announcement, but in accumulating degrees that become undeniable before they are finished. He had spent the morning constructing a wall. He had cited protocols, invoked platforms, summoned security, and positioned himself as the enforcer of a system designed to protect the institution. What he was understanding now, in that chair, in that lobby at 10:54 in the morning, was that the institution had already changed. That the wall he had been building had been built, brick by careful brick, inside a building that no longer belonged to the people he had assumed would always own it. He did not speak. Patricia Webb walked to the pharmacy window. She walked the way a person walks when they are carrying something invisible, upright, deliberate, with the careful precision of someone who knows that how they move right now will be the thing they remember later. She spoke briefly with Marcus. She processed the authorization with 2 keystrokes. 2 keystrokes she could have made at any point in the previous 51 minutes. She did not look at Earl Washington when Marcus handed him his medication. She looked at her tablet, at something on the screen that required, apparently, her complete attention. She would not look away from things easily after this. She told me, months later, that those 2 keystrokes were the first thing she thought about every morning for 11 weeks, not with guilt she had resolved and set down, with guilt that had become useful, that had become the thing she measured herself against every time. Going forward, she thought about staying quiet. Earl Washington put the prescription bottle in his jacket pocket. He returned the photograph of his granddaughter to the inside pocket, close to his chest, where it belonged. He gathered his insurance card, folded it back into his wallet, and turned toward the elevator with the quiet, unhurried economy of a man who has a granddaughter waiting in a car outside and has spent more than enough of his morning in this building. At the elevator doors, he paused. He looked back at me once. Then the doors opened, and he stepped inside, and he was gone. I picked up my bag. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the ground floor. I did not look at the nursing station. I did not look at the pharmacy window, or the security officers, or the man with the phone, or any of the people still finding their footing in a room that had shifted under all of them. In my mind, in that moment, was not the certificate, not the percentage, not the audit data or the compliance report or the 6 hours remaining before the deadline. In my mind was a text message from a man who had pressed his uniform that morning for the first time in 31 years. The elevator doors closed. I took out my phone. I called him. He picked up on the second ring. "Baby, I am on my way," I said. I hung up. I walked through the ground floor lobby, through the main entrance, out into the Atlanta morning, bright, September warm, the kind of day that does not acknowledge what has happened inside buildings. I walked 3 blocks to my car, got in, and sat for exactly 2 seconds before starting the engine. Not to collect myself. I was already collected, just to let the quiet be what it was. Then I drove. The state medical board received the completed ownership transfer filing at 2:17 in the afternoon on the same day. That evening, Dr. Amara Osei testified before the Congressional Subcommittee on Healthcare Equity at 7:30 in the evening. She had 5 minutes. She used 4 of them. She referenced that morning's events not as grievance but as data, one morning among 11 in her own record among 19 in the audit report. Among the tens of thousands of similar mornings that would never appear in any report because no one in them had been holding a folder. At 8 in the evening, she stood in room 114 on the ground floor of Northgate Memorial Hospital and watched her father receive a plaque for 31 years of service. She stood beside him when they called his name. She did not tell him that night what the building now said about her. She told him 3 weeks later, in the kitchen of his house, over coffee, in a conversation that lasted 2 hours and which neither of them has fully described to anyone else. Patricia Webb did not leave the cardiology floor. She had considered it. The transfer request was drafted twice and deleted twice in the weeks following that Tuesday morning. What kept her was not comfort. It was the specific discomfort of understanding that leaving would be the easier version of what she owed. 4 weeks after that morning, she submitted a formal proposal to hospital administration for what became the institution's first peer intervention protocol for witnessed credential discrimination. The protocol required any nursing staff member who witnessed a credential challenge to verbally confirm the provider's employment status on record before the interaction proceeded. It was not complicated. It was 2 sentences and a signature. It was the kind of policy that takes 14 years of institutional knowledge and 1 morning of regret to design correctly. Within 60 days, 94 of 97 nursing staff on the floor had completed the training. Patricia led 11 of the 12 sessions herself. She still thinks about those 2 keystrokes. She has said, to the 3 nurses she trusts most on that floor, that she expects she always will. Not as a wound she carries, but as a weight she uses. The kind that keeps you honest about the distance between knowing something is wrong and doing something about it before someone else has to. Richard Holt was placed on administrative leave within 48 hours of that Tuesday. The internal investigation, conducted by an independent compliance firm appointed by the new ownership, took 11 weeks. Due process is slow by design, and Amara had insisted on it, over the objection of 2 board members who wanted a faster resolution. Her position was that a system which dispensed with process when it was convenient proved nothing about its commitment to process when it was not. What the investigation found extended beyond that morning. The flag ESCALATE field in the MedVerify system had been manually configured under Holt's administrative credentials to trigger automatically on provider name entries whose phonetic profiles matched non-English origin surname patterns. The configuration had been in place for 14 months. The 23 flags it produced had been reviewed and approved one by one at his discretion. The investigation concluded with a finding of deliberate discriminatory practice and willful misuse of administrative authority. His employment was terminated for cause. His case was referred to the Georgia Professional Standards Commission. It was not a satisfying ending in the way that endings are sometimes described as satisfying, swift, clean, proportionate. It was the outcome of a process, arrived at through documentation and testimony, and 11 weeks of careful, procedurally correct work. Which is to say, it was the system, finally, functioning the way systems are supposed to function when someone with standing refuses to let the evidence disappear. Earl Washington has his prescription filled the same afternoon he calls it in. He came back to the 6th floor once, 3 months after that Tuesday, with his granddaughter. She was 7 years old and wearing a purple dress, the same color as the photograph he had placed on the pharmacy counter that morning. He introduced himself to the new pharmacy coordinator, a woman named Denise who had started the week after Holt's departure and who had been trained, among other things, on the institution's updated supplemental coverage protocol. He did not stay long. He had what he had come for. Northgate Memorial Hospital, in the 3 months following the ownership transition, the FLAG ESCALATE notation was applied twice. Both instances were resolved through standard verification within 22 minutes. Both were closed without incident. This compared to 23 applications in the previous 14 months, 11 of which had resulted in documented delays to patient care. The average time to resolve credential queries for providers of color fell from 4 hours and 6 minutes to 22 minutes. 3 pending discrimination complaints filed by providers against the institution over the previous 14 months were reviewed, validated, and settled in the same week as Holt's departure. Patient satisfaction scores among Black patients in the cardiology unit rose from 61% to 84% over the quarter, the largest single-quarter improvement recorded in that department's measurable history. Under the Community Reinvestment Covenant written into the acquisition agreement, the hospital allocated $2.3 million in the first fiscal quarter toward expanded services in 4 zip codes that had been classified as medically underserved for more than a decade. These are not public relations numbers. They are operational outcomes, reported to the State Medical Board as required under the terms of the acquisition, available to anyone who submits a records request and is willing to read a spreadsheet. The video from that Tuesday morning was uploaded to social media at 11:34 in the morning, while Amara was still driving to her attorney's office. It reached 4.7 million views across platforms within 72 hours. It showed, without commentary, Richard Holt's public statement about moving Amara to the ground floor lobby, the 2 security officers positioning themselves at the lobby edges, and Earl Washington standing at the pharmacy window, prescription bottle in hand. Photograph visible on the counter beside him. Within 30 days of the video circulation, 3 additional hospital systems in Georgia initiated independent audits of their credential verification practices. 2 announced policy revisions before the audits were complete. At the federal level, the Congressional Subcommittee on Healthcare Equity proposed the Healthcare Provider Equity Verification Act, requiring standardized, auditable credential verification protocols across institutions receiving federal funding. The bill was in committee at the time of this telling. Dr. Y. Amara Osei does not manage Northgate Memorial Hospital's daily operations. She hired a chief executive officer for that, a woman named Dr. Chor. Sandra Okafor, 39 years old, trained in both medicine and institutional administration, who had been on a short list Amara had kept for 2 years before she had anything to offer her. Dr. Okafor runs the hospital. Amara chairs the board. 3 months after the ownership transfer, she was in the early stages of a second acquisition, a network of 4 community health clinics in South Atlanta, serving a patient population that was 81% uninsured or underinsured. The capital structure was different this time. The timeline was longer. The work was the same. She keeps one thing from that Tuesday morning on her desk. Not the State Medical Board certificate, not the audit report, not the federal approval letter. She keeps the compliance officer's notes. Diane Marsh's handwritten notes from the 28 minutes they sat across from each other on the second floor before they went upstairs together. Because the notes record not the outcome, but the moment before the outcome. The moment when a woman with a folder and a filing deadline sat across from a stranger and told the truth before she had any confirmation that it would be enough. And Diane Marsh had listened and written it down and stood up and walked upstairs. That is the detail Amara returns to, not the percentage, not the timestamp. The decision of one person, who had no folder and no ownership stake and no acquisition to protect, to stand up and walk upstairs anyway. Something changed. It is worth saying that plainly, without qualification, before anything else is said. A pattern that had operated without accountability for 14 months was documented, investigated, and ended. A man lost a position of authority he had used to cause harm through a process that did not circumvent due process to reach its conclusion. An institution revised policies that had failed people for longer than the records show. Earl Washington fills his prescription on the day he calls it in. These things are real, they are measurable. They matter, not as resolution, but as evidence that systems can be moved when the right pressure is applied in the right place. But here is the limit of this story, and it deserves to be spoken as plainly as what the story proved. She won because she had a document time-stamped 10:43 in the morning. She won because she had spent 3 years and $4.3 million and the accumulated knowledge of a legal and financial education most people will never have access to. She won because the specific, unusual shape of her power happened to intersect with the specific, ordinary injustice of that morning in a way that made accountability possible. What she experienced was not exceptional. What she brought to it was. What about the cardiologist who faces the same flag and does not own the building? What about the provider who documents everything and submits the formal statement and waits 11 weeks for an investigation that concludes with a finding of insufficient evidence? What about the 22 other mornings in that 14-month window? The providers who were delayed an hour, 2 hours, who were asked to step away from floors they had earned the right to stand on, who did not have an acquisition in their bag and went home that evening to a system that had already moved on. How many institutions only change when the person experiencing the injustice also has the leverage to compel it? How many people walk through those same doors every morning, every single morning in every city and every building, without the paper, without the preparation, without the 3 years of quiet, careful work that built the only kind of power the system seems to recognize in time? And what does it say about the stories we choose to tell, and the ones we choose to receive, and the conditions under which we are willing to call something resolved? That the narrative we return to most often is the one that ends in a reveal? Not the 10,000 that end in a waiting room, not the ones that end in a policy that never changed, not the ones that end in a veteran standing at a pharmacy window in a Veterans Administration jacket, holding a photograph of his granddaughter, waiting for someone to walk across the lobby. Dr. Amara Osei did not fix the system. She moved one piece of it in one building on one morning with resources most people do not have. That is worth something. It is not worth everything. The question that remains, the one she still carries, and the one this story cannot answer for you, is what we are each prepared to do on the mornings when we are the one standing closest to something wrong. And the folder is someone else's, and the elevator is right there, and it would be so easy and so understandable and so human to look away. At Black Voices Uncut, we do not soften the emotion or dilute the message. We tell powerful fictional stories inspired by the real, documented, ongoing realities that too many people navigate in silence, in hospitals, in courtrooms, in boardrooms, in lobbies, at pharmacy windows, on floors they have earned the right to stand on. If today's story moved you, if it made you think or made you see something you could not look away from, or reminded you of a morning you have never stopped carrying, leave a comment. Tell us what stayed with you. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you do not miss the next story. Because this conversation does not end when the video does, it ends when the system does. And we are not there yet.